You are listening to Fantha tracks.
He's waiting.
Classic Star Wars and the collectibles they gave us. From vintage Star Wars to the modern era of the saga. This is Collecting Tracks. Here are your hosts, Richard Hutchinson and Chris Leddy.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Collecting Tracks. I'm Richard Hutchinson.
And I'm Chris Leddy.
And we're your hosts for episode 3, Star Wars in Hot Toys. Well, Chris, it seems like anything from 24 hours to 6 weeks since we last recorded. Time has flown by. And what have you been up to since the last show?
Oh, man. Time has definitely flown by. I mean, really taking in the latest Star Wars content with Andor, enjoying that. Looking forward to seeing where that series is going to go. Picking up some pieces for the collection. Been really into the Star Wars officially licensed sketch cards from Topps. Been picking up some of the Mandalorian comics and variants. I was lucky enough to make an appearance on my friend's podcast / YouTube channel, Collecting Weekly, and I had fun talking about some of the latest in collecting in general. So a little bit different format for me to jump in on.
I've been watching Andor as well. I've got to say that the first episode, I just didn't get it. I watched it 3 times and I thought, I'm missing something here. But by the end of the third episode, I thought, right, okay, it's moving along really, really well. And then the last episode, I feel as though it was dragged a little bit too long. And I don't mind slower paced things at all. But for me, this is not a Star Wars TV series yet. This is a heist storyline set in the Star Wars world. If that makes sense. Yeah, what are your thoughts on Andor at the moment?
No, I'm right there with you. I think like the production quality, the acting, all that stuff, the visuals, everything's been top notch as far as that goes. Definitely the story and the plot line is a little bit slower paced, like you said. So that's why I'm like kind of looking more towards what's coming with the series, and hopefully it starts grasping some of those Star Wars points and things that we recognize, and drawing those in. I'm intrigued, but a little bit underwhelmed with what's come out so far.
But I'm sure by the time it all wraps up, I'm sure I'm going to be waxing lyrical about it, because I loved Rogue One, and I've got no problem with the lack of Jedi or anything like I was told. Got absolutely no problem with it at all, but I want it to be more Star Wars for me.
I get it.
Action.
Yes.
But what I have done is I've loved juggling this with Rings of Power and the House of Dragon. All 3 TV series for me have got some major high points, and they've got some bits that I could think, I could have done that a little bit better or whatever. But I think all 3 shows are really strong, and they're really powerful, and it points to how fantasy and sci-fi, which going back 15 years was kind of like the minor thing, but now these are billion-dollar franchises.
This is what's driving these streaming platforms. I'm super into both of those series. I love Lord of the Rings. I love Game of Thrones. Consumed all that content. I'm even into all the Marvel stuff. It's crazy, like all these TV shows from all these pop culture franchises and stuff, and this is what's leading these streaming platforms.
Absolutely. Work's been keeping me crazy busy. Obviously, the kids go back to school. I'm a school teacher. Doesn't matter how much planning you do pre-September. As soon as September comes around, you're always behind from the start.
Seems to be the case always.
Absolutely. So as promised in the last episode, then we're going to look at Hot Toys this month. And Chris, I'm going to have to lean on you heavily on this, because other than seeing these amazing items at cons and in the local comic book stores, my knowledge of Hot Toys is very, very, very limited. I was mentioning that to my wife about an hour ago, and she asked what we're talking about. I said Hot Toys, and she went, well, what does that mean? Are they hot to touch, or are they hot property, or whatever? And well, that's a fair point. So Hot Toys, and where did it all start then, Chris? What was their initial mission? What was their goal?
When I first got into it, I was mentioned that to my wife, and she's like, what the heck are you talking about? But she knows all about it now.
Whether she wants to or not.
Exactly. The CEO and founder of Hot Toys, Howard Chan, created the company back in 2000. His aim was to create the most detailed figures possible in 1/6 scale. That's roughly 12 inches tall. I don't know what that is on your side of things.
It's 12 inches as well.
Yes,
we don't use meters for things like this.
He just got started with military type figures, highly detailed for the time, with their outfits, their clothing, their accessories, jam-packed with every kind of feature you could think of. That's kind of what got the company started. because him and some of the other creators involved were really into pop culture, they started making unlicensed figures, some of the first being Neo from The Matrix, and of all figures, George Lucas. Those kind of figures and the quality that they had put into these figures led to them starting to get official licenses for movie franchises in about 2003.
So they actually made a hot toy figure of George Lucas, because
Yes.
I've never heard that before. Is that easy to acquire, or is that
No.
now disappeared now?
It's a tough one to find, honestly, because it's so early from the company. The production run was pretty low. A lot of them are locked up in collections, but every once in a while you'll see one pop up on eBay. They're not going to be cheap, especially for what the figure is now. It looks more like a little bit higher quality than the Kenner Hasbro 12-inch figure lines from the 90s. Just a little bit nicer than those, but it's a pretty bare bones kind of figure.
When did the Hot Toys get the Star Wars license, and what was the initial release like?
They had been picking up these licenses from 2003 and onward, major movie franchises and that sort of thing. And one thing that the owner of the company, Howard Chan, really wanted was Star Wars. He wanted that license. He's a huge fan. Eventually, he was able to work with Lucasfilm and got it in about 2010. And it took them a couple years to get their first figure released to collectors' hands. The figure that he chose to go with to jumpstart this line was the Bespin Luke Skywalker. That was a big deal at the time because he put it into the DX series, which is a deluxe line. That line typically has all sorts of accessories, additional effort put into the clothing, usually multiple head sculpts. This figure didn't lack in any of that. It was a 2 complete figure set. Luke had his normal head sculpt. Then on one figure, he had a quote unquote battle damage head sculpt on the other. And it came with all sorts of accessories. The antenna tower prop Luke was hanging off of comes with that whole assembly, and you can mount it to a wall. It's a really nice set, and it's still desirable today. I mean, it's still a figure that commands anywhere between $800 to over $1,000 if it's still factory sealed. For collectors, they had to wait another 2 years before they got more Star Wars figures. They ended up coming out with A New Hope based figures with Leia, Luke, Obi-Wan, Han and Chewie, Darth Vader, and a number of others. Those all released in pretty close time frame from each other, and those were under the MMS line, or the Movie Masterpiece series. I have a few collector friends that were in the Hot Toys game from the get-go. At the time, it was easy to pick them up as they were coming out based on the retail price. But as we'll probably get to later, man, going back and trying to pick up these original figures is not the easiest for the wallet.
There was only one figure released in the deluxe line, and all the rest were released as MMS. What are the differences between the two?
So all the A New Hope figures released in the MMS line, they just didn't have as many accessories. A New Hope Leia it's a pretty bare bones figure. You might have a couple extra hands and a couple little accessories, but for the most part, you're just getting the figure, a blaster, but just a couple things. Luke has a little bit more. Farm boy Luke. He's got a hat. He's got his rifle. He's got all sorts of accessories. But again, compared to the DX series, it's a step down in what you get, but not a step down in the quality of the actual figure.
So how do Hot Toys release their figures then? Do they release in waves, such as the original Kenner line did? Are they released as movie groups? How do they do it?
As a collector, I wish they would do that, but they don't really follow that format. Since they started coming out in 2014 with the New Hope figures and some other Empire figures, the next year was 2015 with The Force Awakens, and they went really heavy with Force Awakens figures. Following the movie releases from Force Awakens all the way up through The Rise of Skywalker, they would be pretty consistent with releasing some figures for pre-order before the movie and then some after the movie, and then sprinkling in figures from the original trilogy or other lines in between. So they would be fairly consistent with the movie releases, but the one problem is they wouldn't be releasing an entire wave of figures. It would be some troopers and then maybe a Rey figure, and then a Kylo figure, then maybe some more troopers. And it's not like, here you go, here's the full team right out of the gate. I mean, they basically followed that model all the way up through right before the pandemic. Unfortunately, the pandemic really screwed things up as far as their release schedules go. The past 2 years, it's been super sporadic with how they release their figures. There's been kind of no rhyme or reason. You might get a figure here or there for, Mandalorian. You might get it for Clone Wars. You might get it for Bad Batch, kind of in line with when the show has come out. But it's really hit or miss these days, with how they have been releasing the figures. And on top of that, we're not getting full release of all the main characters from the movies. One of the big examples is from Rogue One. They released Jyn and K2SO and Chirrut and some of the other characters, but we never got a Cassian. We never got a Baze. We never got a Bodhi or even a Saw Gerrera. So it's frustrating for some collectors trying to complete a line of figures. And also a figure like Poe Dameron has never gotten released for sequel trilogy fans. Padme's never gotten released for prequel trilogy fans. It's just very, very different compared to, a lot of collectors who started out, 3 3/4 inch or Black Series, where 9 times out of 10, you're going to get the entire team, but not so much for Hot Toys.
Hey, this is Lauren Mary Kim, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
That's similar to the frustrations we've had for 30 years, especially in the EU.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't release books in order, and then the whole new Old Republic books would come out, then we'd be back to the Clone Wars, then we'd be back to sequels, and, jumping all over the place. So I don't think we're any new to that, but I'm really shocked that we haven't got Padme and Poe Dameron, and how could you possibly do Rogue One without Cassian?
I know. It is odd, and we've never gotten official word on it, but some inside sources think that a lot of it has to do with the company getting approval for actor likenesses. I don't know if it's the 6-scale format. Obviously we get all those characters, or most of them, in the smaller figures, but for some reason in the 1/6 scale, the hyper accurate likenesses for, Natalie Portman's character, Oscar Isaac's character, and so on. And it's the same with Marvel and other franchises. For whatever reason, those particular actors are not approving them. But I think a lot of it has to do with just Hot Toys and their model for producing figures that are going to have a big reception. They might not be as confident in a Padme figure as they are, I don't know, like a Death Trooper figure or something. It's funny how they pick and choose which characters. And a lot of these figures have been shown at conventions like San Diego Comic-Con in prototype form. We've seen Padme, we've seen Poe Dameron, we've seen Baze, but they never made it past the prototype stage. And collectors have seen these figures in person, when they go to these shows, and it's like, that almost makes it even worse that they haven't released them. I mean, you'll see on a lot of Hot Toys official posts on Facebook after the random figures announced, you'll see, where's Baze, where's Padme, where's Poe Dameron? Like, all the fans chime in. I don't think that's helping the situation, but it is a slightly frustrating one, especially for new collectors coming in. That's why I kind of want to make it known, like, if you want to complete a Rogue One line, if that's your favorite movie, you're not quite going to get there at this point anyway.
You've answered my question about releases, because I was kind of thinking, how do these things come out? You can be watching the updates and all of a sudden they'll announce, I don't know, Emperor's World Guard. So you think, Emperor's World Guard, it's a fairly popular character, you can understand that. And then the next one, it'll jump to Ahsoka or the Mandalorian. And then, and I don't know, are they trying to appease to different fan groups? For example, there'll be fans now thinking, well, what on earth have they released Emperor's Wild God for? Especially the ones that were interested in the Mandalorian and newer collectors. Whereas others, we think, and Padme is pointless, don't understand why they never released Padme. The boats sailed on Padme a long time ago. But equally, those in the late 20s, early 30s, Padme is there, yeah. So are they trying to cater to different audiences, do you think, and not quite getting it all right? Yes,
I think that's the issue, is they're trying to reach to all these different areas within Star Wars, and it's like grabbing pieces here and there, but you're just not quite nailing it because it's so sporadic. And sometimes it can take up to 2 years to release a figure after it's been announced for pre-order. So, sometimes their tastes change in 2 years. Back when they pre-ordered the figure that was randomly announced, they're like, all right, sweet, they're going to complete this team and all this stuff, but then ultimately they don't. So it does make for a very different type of collecting.
But that must be part of the fun, mustn't it, though, thinking announcements coming in December, I wonder what they're going to come out, we're all hoping for X, we're all hoping for Y, and you end up getting something that's absolutely bonkers.
Yep. I mean, you're not wrong. It follows right in line, and people in the Hot Toys that have been in the Hot Toys collecting game for a while, we all say like, oh, that's Hot Toys being Hot Toys. They just do what they want to do.
So I've asked you to have a look at some of your favourite items to discuss, and for me, I would always be harkening back to the original trilogy because that's where my passion is. Although equally, I've been amazed at some of the stuff from the Rogue One movie, for example. So what are your favourites, and Chris?
There's amazing figures that I've owned previously and have since moved on from them, not because I didn't love the figures, it was just because of collecting directions and that sort of thing. And a lot of those Rogue One figures are just amazing. I kind of focused in on what I have currently in my collection. I've pared down significantly over the last year plus. So my top figure in my collection for Star Wars is TMS 021, Clone Wars Ahsoka Tano from season 7. She's my favorite character. I've made it known before. But this figure, it's just amazing. The likeness, it's funny how in prototype form, it was almost there. The head sculpt was very good, but from prototype form to release, it was a full 2 years before I received my figure from pre-ordering it on the day it was released. They improved the head sculpt. And that's one thing about Hot Toys is 95% of the time, they're never satisfied with the prototype. They'll always continue to dial it in and improve it before it actually comes out. They absolutely nailed this figure. It basically looks like a real life version of the Clone Wars Ahsoka from the animated series, from the fit and finish of the suit and her eyes. You can move them. So there's a special tool that you take the head sculpt out and you can move them from side to side, up and down, and you can give her some more character. Yeah, just an amazing figure. Some people are going to have concerns about the seamless arms. One thing with Hot Toys collecting is from previous releases, like older releases, you've seen deterioration from pleather or seamless arms where you can get some cracking at the elbow joint. So definitely things to take into consideration. Hot Toys continues to improve the materials that they use, and I don't really have any of those concerns. For my own figures and collection, top tier figure for me. Another one, TMS 018, Captain Rex. Really, really good figure, obviously from Clone Wars. And it comes with an unmasked head sculpt. And again, this is not an animated version of the character. This is Captain Rex as if he was live action. So he's got the Tamora Morrison head sculpt, comes with all kinds of accessories, jetpack, just a great figure. I love it. It pairs very well with the Ahsoka. Another one is TMS 007, The Mandalorian. That's his original release from season 1. I love that series. And I just think back to the first time I watched that series, and I have it right over my shoulder in my shelving unit behind my recording area. And I just keep on looking back at it. And I was just like, oh man, it was so amazing to watch that show for the first time, and looking forward to what, is coming up with season 3. Luke Skywalker, he's my second favorite character behind Ahsoka. Return of the Jedi is my favorite movie from the original trilogy. Endor is one of my favorite parts of that movie. So it's MMS 516 Endor Luke. There was 2 releases for this figure. There was a deluxe version which came with some accessories related to the deleted sandstorm scenes, but this is the regular release, and he's got his commando helmet, poncho. It's a really good figure. Some like the deluxe version better because it comes with another head sculpt. This one works for me. But yeah, those are ones in my collection. Obviously, there's other amazing figures. Our previous episode, we talked about Tarkin. I mean, that figure still holds up to today. Anakin, Skywalker, his several figures, all the Darth Vader figures from Rogue One, and just commanding presence. And yeah, the list can go on and on.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds, bookmark FanthaTracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
Some of the other toy manufacturers who don't release things as good quality as Hot Toys, and I'm thinking of things like Gentle Giant, they always talked about how difficult it is to get a human face in a sculpt without it looking creepy. But these have done amazingly well, haven't they? That Endor look is fantastic, but all of the human faces on the Han Solos and the Leias, they're outstanding.
They are the top tier sculptors in the game. Hot Toys, you can kind of see it if you've been collecting over time. They continually improve their painting applications for production. They just keep getting better and better. There's not much lost from sculpting of the prototypes to, the original release. Some figures, especially ones with like facial hair, like Obi-Wan Kenobi, they're a bit soft, I would say, in the sculpt, like the beard and mustache. Some collectors are a little bit nitpicky on those types of things, but honestly, in the correct lighting and set up in a display or specific photography, most of that stuff is not as noticeable. It's in like bright, direct light where things just don't look quite right. The sculpts in general just keep getting better and better. I just wish Hot Toys would make more Star Wars figures with face sculpts, because they're notorious for just continuing to release helmeted version figures because it's a lot easier.
Mm-hmm. These figures aren't cheap at all. I've had the R5D4, which was an amazing, absolutely amazing figure. Do they hold their value?
I would say most stay pretty close to that retail price. Some dip a little bit, some go up a little bit. And if you keep good care of the figures, it's not like, a Black Series or a 3 3/4 inch. If you open it up, the value automatically drops. I mean, these figures are meant to be open. And if you, display them and take care of them, then collectors, buyers, they don't really care that they've been opened. If it's complete and there's no defects or anything, and it's a desirable figure, a lot of the time it'll go for more than retail. Some of the recent figures, after they get released, and if they stay in stock for a long time at a lot of these retailers, and then you're trying to resell it while it's still in stock, you will take a hit in value. But man, some of the older figures, like the DX07 previously mentioned, that one specifically has a high value still, up around that $1,000 mark. The Vader and Tarkin 2-pack sits around that value too. The A New Hope Han and Chewie set is up there. Figures like Count Dooku, I mean, he's really desirable in the aftermarket just because he wasn't super pre-ordered, so there's not a ton of options in the secondary market to buy his figure. There's good value in there. You're not going to be taking a huge hit by having some of these in your collection if you want to end up moving them on.
When you say taking care of them, how do you actually look after these? Are there any specific instructions from Hot Toys?
Each figure comes with their own instructions, more specifically for like removing specific pieces of clothing to put on other accessories, proper ways to handle the figures. They'll say like, don't grab the figure from here while trying to remove the head sculpt or whatnot. So I would definitely, at the very least, look at those instructions before you start diving into getting a figure set up. There are actually a lot of videos out there on YouTube on how to maintain specific materials, like on the Ahsoka, the arms, seamless arms, wiping them down, making sure that they're not stuck in dynamic poses for too long is a key thing, because you can stretch out material. Things like leather conditioner for some of the materials, dusting, cleaning on a regular basis, definitely not in direct sunlight. You want to make sure that they're protected. All my figures are open air, like they're all displayed in the open air, so I've got to dust them. But a lot of people put them in detofs or Modja cases or, they're enclosed displays. So most of the time there's very little upkeep on them, but they aren't free of upkeep. You've got to maintain these figures if you want them in the top tier quality.
What advice do you have for newbies wanting to get in Hot Toys, and so what would you recommend as a starting place?
So personally, I would start by making a list of your top tier characters, just in general. Like, what are your favorite characters in Star Wars, and what's your goal with collecting in the 6 scale? And then compare that to what Hot Toys has made in the past, what's coming up for pre-order. Shop around, be patient. Don't jump in with both feet, because you'll go down an expensive rabbit hole very quickly. And I'd really try to look forward in collecting Hot Toys. If you start going backwards, yes, there's a lot of great releases, but it can get expensive very fast. And it's a little bit easier to manage financially if you're, looking forward or what's already released at retail. Because once you start buying stuff that's higher than retail, I mean, you're really limiting, what you can get. You don't want to pay for something 2-3 times retail and then, kill your budget at that point. And I'm always available. Like I've gone through everything you could think of in Hot Toys 1/6 scale collecting. So, I mean, if anybody has any questions, they can definitely reach out to me. But yeah, I've been through all the ups and downs of Hot Toys. I'm at a really good place now. It's taken me a few years to find it, but I feel good with where my collection's at.
I'm Brian Herring, BB-8 puppeteer, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks. That'll learn you.
You're part of a podcast that talk about Hot Toys figures and things, aren't you? Do you just collect Star Wars, or do you have a wider interest?
Yes, 6 scale scavengers. Actually, it's funny. I was looking, sorry to go on a tangent. I made my first appearance on the Vintage Rebellion podcast right around the time we had started 6 scale scavengers in 2018. I thought that was a funny note. But yeah, because I had such a big Star Wars collection, I was like, all right, when I start collecting Hot Toys, I'm going to just focus on Marvel. And so for about a little over a year, I only collected Marvel Hot Toys, but I couldn't hold back. Late 2019, I started getting into Star Wars, but now I have some Marvel representation, mostly Star Wars, some from DC, and I actually have a Back to the Future figure. So I kind of mix it up now, but it's hard because if you're a fan of a lot of these pulp culture franchises, Hot Toys makes such amazing figures. It's difficult to not have at least one or two represented in your collection.
They make Lord of the Rings, my budget's done for.
There's 6 scale Lord of the Rings figures, and I won't I won't put you down that path.
We've got some people who are interested in Hot Toys, and they've got ideas, and they like Vader, and they like Luke, and they like Leia, and they like Rey. Where would they go to check to see what is already out there? Do Hot Toys maintain a list? Where's the place to go? hottoys.com.hk. They can check that out. They don't give you a ton of information. I would usually cross-reference the figures on that, to Sideshow Collectibles. Even if a figure's way sold out like years ago, you can search on their website and they have the pages for those figures kind of stored in the archives, and you can kind of get a description. One current site I would recommend checking out is 6scalecantina.com. Pete over there, he has a YouTube channel, and he does a lot of live streams and stuff, but his big thing is maintaining Star Wars value, his value chart, but not just the value. It gives you a list of almost 170 Star Wars Hot Toys that have either been released or are up for pre-order. He's got the whole list there, and you can kind of see what the going rates are on average, look at eBay sold prices to get a better feel for what the values are for a particular figure. There's some resources out there, but that one at least gives you a breakdown of all the figures that have come out before. Unfortunately, with 6 scale scavengers, my co-host Brian had created these amazing detailed checklists. He had everything you could think of, but the powers that be at eBay decided to make us take those down because they didn't quite meet our affiliate link policies. So it was really unfortunate to lose that database. It was the only database like that on the internet, but they weren't getting their money, the type of money that they wanted. So I mean, if anybody has any questions as far as that, I mean, you can search on Google, but there's a lot of other resources aside from the ones that I mentioned as well. So we've got a listener who is a huge, I don't know, TIE Fighter pilot fan, and they spotted that Hot Toys did a TIE Fighter pilot 7 years ago. What are the chances of them picking up these pieces?
I mean, I'd say for the majority of the figures previous released, you probably got a good shot of finding that figure either on eBay or a foreign retailer. You might have to pay maybe more than you're comfortable paying for some of these figures. But for the most part, other than like some like really random exclusives that have come out, you can basically find every figure at any time somewhere on the internet.
One of the things I've never fully understood is this. I don't really get the relationship between Hot Toys and Slideshow Collectibles. How did them two marry together? Because one time I thought both of them released completely different figures until I realised that they were the same.
Yeah, actually, I think it was back in like 2014. Hot Toys, Howard Chan was trying to look at how to get the figures out to more markets around the world. And they ended up striking up a deal with Sideshow Collectibles, which is a California-based company. They've been around for a long time. Yeah, I mean, they make their own figures and so on. But because Sideshow had already been established and had like good pre-order types of policies in place, they had kind of been there, done that with a lot of that stuff. It kind of made sense for Hot Toys to make an agreement with them to distribute for North America and for Europe their products. So yeah, I know a lot of the time people think that Sideshow and Hot Toys is the same company. They're not. Hot Toys does their thing. Sideshow distributes the figures. Hot Toys has helped Sideshow in making a lot of their Clone Wars figures that Sideshow had. I think they consult on some other figures as well. Yeah, two separate companies, but they kind of work hand in hand.
Now, one thing I don't get, and I never have, it's the same with comics as well. Why do they do limited runs if there's a bigger demand for these things?
It's part of Hot Toys' model. They do the pre-order format where they only produce what's pre-ordered. They might have a little buffer percentage on top of that to cover, you know, any defective figures, or retailers like Disney stores in the parks and stuff like that will order stock and that sort of thing. But the pre-order format, it's frustrating for many because like if a figure is not pre-ordered well and then it comes out and then it's really well received, the people that pre-ordered it are the ones that benefit because they then can sell the figure for much higher than retail. This kind of happened with some random troopers, like the Shore Trooper, especially from Rogue One. It was super under pre-ordered. And then when it came out, people are like, oh my God, this figure's stunning. Like, what was I doing? And for a long time, that figure was, for a sealed copy, or you were looking at like $800 US. Since then, there's been a couple other releases that have come out, so it's really dropped the value on that. But still, it happens. For some figures, they never get a release, you know, an additional release, or they don't get a 2.0 version or whatever. So those figures are the ones that still maintain like pretty decent value. But as we've seen in the past couple years, Hot Toys has really been doing reissues, like on the Marvel and DC side of things, like figures getting straight releases just with like a different box or something. Maybe they'll get an exclusive accessory. That really brings the values down for the previously released version. They're quite a bit more limited on the Star Wars side as to what they can do as far as that goes. But DX07, the Bespin Luke, did get a 2.0 release, but it didn't affect the original version because it was the accessories and the 2-pack and everything helped keep the value there. But as far as the limited runs, Hot Toys isn't going to pull a Hasbro and make 150,000 pieces for a particular figure, and then nobody wants that figure, and that's just going to sit on retail shelves and go on clearance and stuff. They really only make what people order.
So what's next on the horizon for Hot Toys? There's been a lot of Comic-Cons out lately. What are they moving to?
Yeah, I mean, as of recently, they've put out a number of the figures from the Kenobi series. All the Inquisitors have been shown, at least. So that's actually going to be a team that may get completed. Unfortunately, your guess is as good as mine. Sideshow did their own online con. Usually, Hot Toys will give Sideshow the prototypes and stuff to set up at their booths, like at San Diego Comic-Con and the like. But I'm just hoping that they make some of these figures previously teased, hoping that Andor might get something, finally get a Cassian figure. Mando Season 3 coming out soon. Hopefully there's still some figures from previous Mando series that haven't even been released yet. Mandalorian Ahsoka, DX figures. They've got a lot of work to do. They're way behind on production and releasing of the figures that have been announced previously. So I hope that Hot Toys can get these figures out to collectors and start giving us some of these figures that, you know, we've been asking for a long time.
You mentioned these prototypes that appear at cons that never get released. Who are the Gus Lopez and the Chris Georgouliuses of Hot Toys? I mean, I'm assuming these pieces have managed to make their way into some collectors' hands.
Okay, so this whole thing is interesting. The prototype collecting of 1/6 scale, it's not like it is in other areas of Star Wars collecting. Very few pieces make it out. I have seen a number of Hot Toys prototypes hit the market. Usually they're unpainted, first shots, almost never a complete figure. It's usually a head sculpt, accessories, that sort of thing. But as far as complete prototypes, I think for the most part, those stay in-house. I don't think that's something that would make it out onto the open market unless somebody had serious connections with Howard Chan and JC Hong at Hot Toys, unfortunately.
Well, I've learned a lot on this show already about Hot Toys, Chris. You mentioned your podcast, so you may as well tell our listeners how they can get in contact with your podcast, where they download it from. Do you have any YouTube channels?
Yeah, so the podcast is 6 Scale Scavengers. It's available on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify. We also have a YouTube channel, but a lot of it is evergreen content. We would do live streams, so there's good stuff to go back on. Check out the YouTube channel. Lots of information on there, lots of different topics. One of the big things that Brian Fontaine and I set out to do when we started the podcast back in 2018 was to be helpful for collectors, especially new collectors. So even if you go all the way back to the beginning, there's a lot of things that we talk about. If you binge, which God bless you if you do, you'll see our progression through Hot Toys collecting. And lots of things that we discuss are to help collectors and guide them through the process and make them feel like, you know, they're not the only ones that are feeling these things and going through these, because collecting in the Hot Toys 1/6 scale area is not cheap, and you've got to plan things out and things can get carried away quickly. Yeah, check that out.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a worthy listen. Loved your shows, especially the YouTube videos. I was we enjoyed some of those. So thanks for listening to Collecting Tracks. If you want to be part of the action, stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news, visit fanthatracks.com or check out the free Fantha Tracks app through the App Store to follow us on your mobile device. You can reach out to us and send in your listeners' questions by emailing radio@fanthatracks.com. Comment, like and share on any of our social media feeds at Fantha Tracks, and be sure to subscribe, leave a review, preferably a 5-star one, on Amazon Music, Audible, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher or smart speaker of choice. And as always, thanks to James Semple for composing the Fantha Tracks intro, Andy Lythe for our Collecting Tracks open music, and Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. Remember to tune in to Good Morning Tatooine, live Sunday evenings at 9 PM UK time, 4 PM Eastern and 1 PM Pacific on Facebook and YouTube. Check out Fantha Tracks Radio Friday evenings at 7 PM UK time for new episodes of the Fantha from Down Under, Planet Leia, Desert Planet Discs, Start Your Engines, Collecting Tracks and Cannon Fodder, and every Tuesday at 7 PM UK time for your weekly episode of Making Tracks.
Coming up next on Fantha Tracks Radio, it's Making Tracks.
But for now, it's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.